It seems to be a bit of a rite of passage for anyone who talks or writes publicly about books to eventually have something to say about reading pace. I am sure you have seen plenty of videos about it. You might have even made some of those videos. Things like top 10 tips to read faster, or this is how many books I read last year and here's how you can read that many too. Or maybe the flip side, reading too many books ruined my year last year, or I'm going to intentionally slow my reading down, or even how to get joy out of reading slowly. I've noticed often a lot of these videos about reading pace can take somewhat of a defensive position, as if we're all worried, no matter how fast or slow we read, we're all worried that we're being judged for it. We're being judged if we read too fast, we're being judged if we read too slow, we're being judged if we read too medium. It's a perennial topic, and no matter the angle, everyone seems to have something to say about reading pace. And clearly I do too, because here I am making a video about it. However, even given the title, I haven't come to you today with an argument or a case or even an opinion about whether reading slowly is better or reading faster is better. Tell me in the comments, where do you fall, if you even know, on this spectrum? Do you want to read more books? Do you want to read faster? Or are you more on the side where you would rather slow down? You would rather be reading more slowly? Or are you perfectly comfortable with your current pace of reading and you don't really care? I want to read as many books as I possibly can, but I also want to take my time with them and savor each of them and appreciate and understand each of them. So I can't really tell you if I want to read more quickly or if I want to read more slowly. I kind of want to do both. So I come to this topic of reading pace more from a place of curiosity and wanting to experiment rather than from a set of convictions or like a defensive stance. I prefer to think, like really think about how reading pace impacts one's experience of reading a particular book. A while ago, maybe a year ago, maybe even more than that, I saw two separate videos from two separate booktubers who I'm not actually going to name here. Big booktubers, popular booktubers, booktubers who read a lot of books every year very fast. And each of those booktubers separately said something along the lines of, I wish I could slow down my reading, but I don't know how. I don't even know how I would go about reading more slowly. Each of them said this separately. Each of them were coming at it from a place of feeling defensive about how many books they read in a year. And I just thought, now that's interesting. That's really interesting. You know, in a sea of videos and content and articles and everything about reading pace, that's kind of posing a question that was new to me and really caught my attention. What would you do? What would you actually do if your goal was to slow down your reading? There are plenty of fun videos out there about how to speed up your reading pace. We've all seen them. You know, one common tip is, listen to audiobooks and listen to it at a higher speed. That's a great tip for reading more quickly. Not as many. I've found a few, but there are not as many books with actual specific tips for how to slow down your reading. So while I don't value reading quickly over reading slowly or vice versa, or really have an opinion about whether reading fast is better than reading slow, I do love a good thought exercise and I do love a good experiment. But unfortunately, despite the title, this isn't something that can be covered, I don't think, in an 8 quick tips to slow down your reading video. To explore slow reading, what I think we need is a slow experiment. So I am going to share 8 techniques that I think will slow down my reading, but they're techniques that I'm going to experiment with over time. And this video is just the beginning. But first I want to clear something up. No one knows better than us, avid readers, you and me, how vast and varied the world of books is, and how the experience of reading depends on the book you are reading. I mean, it almost goes without saying, so I'll get straight to my point. I firmly believe that slow reading is not the preferred method of reading for, and at least in my opinion, for a plot-driven, pacey page turner. The thrill of a page turner is that it makes you want to turn the page. That's the genius of it. It is a brilliant construction that should be appreciated according to its design. Read it quickly. It's a page turner. But another side of my point is another common situation I see often in social media. So say you have a reading goal for the year and you want to beef up those numbers towards your reading goal. And so you set yourself a period of time and get a big stack of short books, because short books can be read quickly, right? So you can get through them fast. But among those short books, there's a book like, for example, a short book I've read in the past, Visitation by Jenny Erpenbeck, which clocks in at a fairly slim 151 pages. You're excited to have this among your stack of short books. It looks like something you can read quickly. And you do, but then you get to a scene in that book that depicts a moment from the Holocaust. And you gotta set that book down. This is what happened to me. So I love the book Visitation by Jenny Erpenbeck, but I could only read a page a day, if that. I had to set that book down for long periods of time and return to it. It's not a book that I think is intended to read quickly, and its subject matter is covering the history of a particular house over a very, very, very long period of time. Even though it is a short book, I don't think it's something that should be read quickly. My point is, reading pace should be dictated by the individual book. My guess is that many of us, and I think there's been a trend recently of folks saying they want to slow down their reading, and I think my sense is that many of us are saying this because we feel like we aren't getting to appreciate what we read. We aren't appreciating each book. And I think some of us, myself included, think that we need to set a pace for ourselves to be able to keep up with other readers. And therefore, we aren't really letting the books themselves set the pace. When we don't engage properly with a book according to what that book needs, we are missing out. So if we read a page turner slowly, we're missing out on the brilliance and the joy of a page turner, which is to turn those pages. If we read a work of like experimental literary fiction quickly, we might be missing out on other things like language and nuance. I think the ultimate goal is to let the books tell us the pace, right? I think that's what I'm getting at. But back to my original question, what does it look like to slow down your reading? Again, for those books that it makes sense to slow down for. Am I actually going to force my eyeballs to read the words on the page more slowly? Am I going to set a maximum number of pages that I can read in a day? I don't really think that's what I'm getting at. Here's the truth. I don't read fast. I have a very busy life. I can't fit a lot of reading into any day of the week, and I don't force myself to read in all of my free time. I'll read if I want to, but if not, I might be watching makeup tutorials. So I don't read quickly. I don't read a lot of books compared to, I think, a lot of you watching this right now. But here's another truth. I do read fast. Eyeballs to words on the page, I read really fast. And there's another really, really, really big way that I read quickly. When I finish a book, when I close a book, I've finished it, I immediately pick up another book. I move from book to book very quickly because I'm excited to consume more books. And so that's another big way that I read books quickly, is that I move from book to book without much pause in between. So I want to take more time both while reading a particular book and more time in between the books that I'm reading, both with the goal of appreciating each book, absorbing more from each book, and thinking more deeply about each book. And now to the juicy part. I have 8 techniques that I have come up with that I think will slow down my reading. Essentially, what I'm testing are different ways to engage with a book. And I want to see if I can find methods that work better for me, or if different tools work better for different books. And I want to share them with you in advance. So maybe if you would like to, you can follow along. So each of these 8 techniques will have 2 dedicated videos. One will be kind of announcing the concept and sharing what books I'm going to be reading as part of that experiment. And then 2, the second video, will be a vlog of my process, sharing how it went. I originally assigned each of these 8 techniques a month within a year. And the idea was that I would spend 1 month experimenting with that technique of slowing myself down, and then I would share it with you. But even that seemed contrary to the experiment itself, because it's almost no different than telling myself I'm going to read 20 books next month. It's setting a deadline that will pressure me into hurrying through the process, and that is the opposite of what we're trying to do. So I'm going to try each of these techniques or methods until I feel like I have come to a conclusion about it, and then I will move on to the next one. Also, each of the books that I read for this very long project, for all of these 8 techniques, each of the books will have something in common, and I'll share that at the end. Okay, what in the world are these techniques I'm talking about? None of these are revolutionary. This is just what I've come up with. So the first one is rereading. So I'm going to experiment with different rereading techniques. This will include rereading old favorites, but also I want to experiment with reading books that are new to me and then immediately rereading them again as soon as I finish the book. I think rereading is an example of slowing myself down, because I think at the heart of the desire to read quickly is the desire to read as many books as possible. So spending time with a book I have already read is rejecting that impulse. So I'm going to be doing this with some of the Graywolf books that I am reading for Gray and May, which is the kind of reading project that Sarah at Roadworthy and I are doing for the month of May to celebrate Graywolf Press's 50th anniversary. So the next technique I'm calling Picture It, and I'll show you some ways I've been experimenting with visualizing what I'm reading. So these are visuals that I'm creating of various kinds that are related to the book that I'm reading. And I see that as a way of slowing myself down and increasing my engagement with a book in a way that's kind of new for me. Next is journaling. I'm going to force myself to write in a book journal, which, if you've watched this other video, you know is extremely difficult for me. Ideally, I'll experiment with some different ways to write in a book journal, in a reading journal. Do I only write in the journal when I've finished the book? Do I write in the journal at the end of each chapter? Do I spontaneously have the journal in front of me and write in it whenever I'm inspired to do so as I'm reading? Then I want to read in another language. I think this method will probably slow me down the most, because I will be returning to my long neglected French skills. I majored in French in college, but it has been a while. I'm going to try to time this with Women in Translation Month in August, and I'm hoping that through this I'll get to finally read some Annie Ernaux for this project. And my plan is to read a French version of a book or two alongside the English translation. So not only will that for sure slow me down, but I think it will also give me a lot of really fun insight into the art and science of translation, which is something that is very interesting to me, and I know a lot of us too. Next up is 1 page a day, and I have been experimenting with this a bit already. I am finding it nearly impossible. What this is very simply choosing a book and reading only 1 page from it a day. That doesn't mean not reading other books, but that book, reading only 1 page a day. It is embarrassingly hard and should be a fun video. Next, we have annotations. I am going to force myself to take the most copious annotations I've ever taken in my life in a book or two and see what happens. I always annotate in pencil, so I might even force myself to use pen. Next up, we have what I am calling the mystery technique. At some point, I'm going to introduce you to another technique that I've been experimenting with already. It is probably the most intense of all of these techniques, which is why I've already been preparing for it, but I don't want to reveal it quite yet. So among some other books, it will involve the novel Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad. As you likely know, Enter Ghost has been shortlisted for the Women's Prize. And the reason I'm mentioning this specific book is to tie it back to the point. Ideally, I would time this perfectly to coincide with the announcement of the winner of the Women's Prize. However, I'm approaching this slowly, and to hurry up and read the book before the announcement of the prize is the opposite of this goal. I have a feeling this has a good chance as a good contender to win the Women's Prize, and I'm not going to pressure myself to read it before the announcement. I'm just not. So the experiment has begun. And finally, we have the category I am calling big, hard books. I have found that some of the books I read the fastest are the books that I find the most intellectually difficult. And often they're also quite chunky. It's like if I don't understand it, I want to get through it as quickly as possible and just absorb as much as I can and then be done with it. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that or not, but it happened to me with Helen DeWitt's The Last Samurai, where so much of that book was so far over my head, I skimmed probably the majority of it. And I want to see if I can find techniques to force myself out of that habit. When I started brainstorming for this project of slow reading and techniques to slow myself down, I came up with a lot of really dumb ideas. Really stupid, goofy ideas. We're talking like testing salty versus sweet reading snacks, or lighting a strongly scented candle and taking a deep whiff of it every time I find myself skimming. These are the kind of things that I was coming up with. We're gonna try all of the leftover, really stupid stuff on the biggest, toughest books on my shelf, because I think we all need a little humility in our lives, especially when we're reading intellectually difficult fiction. I hinted earlier that every book I read for this project will have something in common, and I cheated a little bit because what they all have in common is what every book on this channel has in common, and that is that all the books will be published by independent publishers, because that's what we talk about here. Surprise! If you are at all interested in following along, I hope you will subscribe. Wish me luck. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll talk to you soon. Bye!